The massive Starship Prime drifted through the void like a predator stalking its prey. Its hull gleamed with the distinctive metal-weave armor of the Empire, a civilization built on strength, honor, and the ancient pack laws that had governed their species for. Inside the ship's grand assembly hall, hundreds of alien dignitaries gathered to witness an event that occurred only once every solar cycle. Commander Thane stood at the center of the hall, his imposing 7-foot frame casting long shadows across the polished floor. His silver fur caught the artificial lighting, and his amber eyes surveyed the crowd with the calculated precision of a born leader. They were a proud warrior race, resembling the wolves of ancient Earth mythology, and Thane was their undisputed Alpha Prime. Today marked the beginning of the choosing, an ancient ritual where potential mates would compete for the right to bond with the most powerful in the known galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species had traveled across star systems to participate, each believing they possessed the strength and cunning necessary to impress the legendary commander. "Let the trials begin," Thane's voice rumbled through the hall, carrying the authority that had conquered 17 star systems and brought peace to the Outer Rim territories. His pack council flanked him, their own impressive forms serving as a reminder of the power structure that dominated this corner of the galaxy. The first suitor stepped forward, a towering crystalline warrior whose body reflected light in dazzling patterns. The creature's species was known for their incredible defensive capabilities and tactical brilliance. "I offer my knowledge of defensive matrices and strategic planning," the being announced, its voice resonating like singing crystal. Thane nodded respectfully. "Show me." What followed was an impressive display of holographic battle simulations, defensive formations that had never been breached, and tactical innovations that had revolutionized space warfare. The crystalline warrior's presentation lasted for an hour, drawing appreciative murmurs from the assembled crowd. Next came a nebula dancer, a being of pure energy whose form shifted and flowed like captured starlight. They demonstrated their ability to manipulate gravitational fields, bend spacetime around small objects, and communicate instantaneously across vast distances through quantum entanglement. "I can give you the power to touch the very fabric of reality," the nebula dancer proclaimed, their form pulsing with cosmic energy. The demonstrations continued throughout the day. A silicon-based life form from the Andromeda spiral showed how they could survive in any environment, even the vacuum of space. A telepathic collective presented their ability to coordinate entire fleets through pure thought. Each suitor brought something remarkable, something that would strengthen the Empire in meaningful ways. As the presentations wore on, Thane found himself impressed but not moved. Each demonstration was technically proficient, strategically sound, and politically advantageous. Yet something was missing, something he couldn't quite identify. The last scheduled suitor was a representative from the Titanium Quartz, a mechanical species known for their precision engineering and mathematical perfection. Their presentation involved complex calculations, efficiency optimizations, and technological innovations that could advance civilization by centuries. As the mechanical being concluded their presentation, Thane prepared to announce a recess for deliberation. The trials had been impressive, but none had truly challenged him or shown him something he hadn't seen before. That's when the commotion started at the back of the hall. Sorry, excuse me," a voice called out in heavily accented galactic standard. The crowd turned to see a figure pushing through the assembled dignitaries, carrying what appeared to be a toolbox and wearing coveralls stained with various unidentifiable substances. The figure was clearly human, a relatively new species to the galactic community. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century, and most established civilizations still considered them primitive upstarts. This particular human appeared to be male, average height for his species, with brown hair that looked like it hadn't been properly groomed in weeks and hands that were permanently stained with engine grease. Is this where the thing is happening?" the human asked, looking around nervously. "The competition thingy. I was working on the ship's primary cooling system when someone mentioned there was some kind of test going on." A collective murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembly. Several of the more prestigious alien dignitaries actually laughed. One of the pack council members stepped forward, his lip curling in disdain. "Human, this is a sacred ceremony. The choosing is not for—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic way to express his contempt. "Maintenance personnel." The human scratched his head, leaving another grease stain in his hair. Oh, well, see, the thing is, I heard there was some kind of challenge, and I've got this problem with the ship's quantum resonance chamber that nobody else seems able to fix. I thought maybe if someone here was actually smart enough to figure it out, they might be worth meeting. The insult was so casual, so completely without malice, that it took several seconds for its full impact to register. The human wasn't just suggesting that he might be worthy of the Alpha Prime's consideration. He was suggesting that everyone else present might not be. Thane felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Amusement, and something else, curiosity. "You question the intelligence of my suitors?" Thane asked, his voice carrying just a hint of danger. The human looked genuinely confused. "Well, no, not really. I'm sure they're all very smart about their own stuff. It's just that intelligence is kind of specific, you know. Like, I bet that Crystal Guy knows everything there is to know about tactical formations, but I'd be willing to bet he's never had to jury-rig a quantum manifold with spare parts and prayer while hostile ships are shooting at you." The crystalline warrior who had presented first drew himself up to his full impressive height. "I have commanded fleets through the most dangerous battles in recorded history." "Sure," the human nodded agreeably. "But have you ever had to fix the engine that powers those fleets when it breaks down in the middle of one of those battles?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. In culture, the ability to solve problems under pressure was highly valued. Survival often depended on adapting quickly when plans went wrong. Thane studied the human more carefully. There was something about the way he stood, relaxed but alert, that reminded the Alpha Prime of a wolf who had survived many hunts. The human's coveralls were indeed stained with various substances, but now that Thane looked closer, he could see the patterns told a story. Chemical burns from working with exotic fuels, metal shavings from precision fabrication, and what looked like quantum lubricant from working on hyperdrive assemblies. "What's your name, human?" Thane asked. The human replied, then added as an afterthought, "Senior Chief Petty Officer if you want to get formal about it. But most people just call me Mac." "And you believe you can solve a problem that has stumped our best engineers?" Mac shrugged. "Don't know until I try. But I've been working on machines since I was old enough to hold a wrench, and I've never met a problem that couldn't be fixed with the right approach and enough creativity." The crowd began to murmur again, but this time the tone was different. Some were amused, others scandalized, but all were curious. The human's casual confidence was either incredibly arrogant or incredibly impressive. Thane made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Very well, show me this problem that cannot be solved." The trip to the engineering section of the Prime turned into an impromptu parade. Word had spread quickly through the ship that the Alpha Prime was personally investigating a technical issue, and crew members lined the corridors to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. The quantum resonance chamber was located in the heart of the ship's engineering section, a massive cylindrical structure that hummed with barely contained energy. The chamber was responsible for stabilizing the ship's faster-than-light drives, and it was clearly malfunctioning. Warning lights flashed in complex patterns, and the sound it produced was definitely wrong to anyone familiar with proper engine operation. "The problem started 3 days ago," explained Chief Engineer Vex, a highly competent who looked deeply embarrassed to be discussing technical failures in front of so many witnesses. "The resonance frequency keeps shifting randomly. We've tried recalibrating the quantum stabilizers, replacing the primary harmonic crystals, and even completely rebuilding the containment field generators. Nothing works." Several of the alien suitors examined the chamber with various scanning devices and sensor arrays. The crystalline warrior ran complex mathematical models. The nebula dancer attempted to manipulate the quantum fields directly. The mechanical being from the titanium quartz performed precise measurements and generated probability matrices. All of them concluded that the chamber needed to be completely rebuilt, a process that would take several weeks and require the ship to be taken out of service. Mac walked around the chamber once, running his hands along various surfaces and listening carefully to the sounds it made. He opened his toolbox and pulled out what appeared to be an ancient handheld scanner, so old and battered that several of the watching aliens couldn't immediately identify its make or model. Mac muttered, waving the scanner near various components. "Interesting." After about 10 minutes of this investigation, he set the scanner down and began removing access panels with practiced efficiency. The watching crowd pressed closer, trying to see what he was doing. "The problem isn't with the resonance chamber," Mac announced without looking up from his work. "It's with the primary sensor array that feeds data to the chamber's control systems." "That's impossible," Chief Engineer Vex protested. "We tested all the sensors. They're functioning within normal parameters." "Oh, the sensors are fine," Mac agreed, reaching deep into the access panel. "The problem is that someone installed a secondary sensor array as a backup, and they're both trying to control the chamber simultaneously. The quantum fields are shifting because the chamber is getting conflicting instructions." He emerged from the access panel holding a small, sophisticated-looking device. "This little guy was installed about, I'd say 6 months ago. Probably seemed like a good idea at the time. Redundant systems, backup controls, that sort of thing. Except whoever installed it didn't account for quantum interference patterns between the two sensor arrays." Mac tossed the device to Chief Engineer Vex, who caught it and stared at it in amazement. That's exactly what happened. We installed the backup array after our last encounter with quantum pirates. But how did you know?" Mac grinned and pointed to his ancient scanner. "This old thing has been with me for 15 years. It's not fancy, but it's sensitive to electromagnetic interference patterns. I could see that your quantum field was being modulated by two separate sources, even though they were almost perfectly synchronized." He began reassembling the access panel. "The reason it took 3 days for the problem to manifest is that the two sensor arrays were initially aligned. But quantum sensors drift over time, and eventually the phase difference became large enough to cause noticeable instability. Give it another day or two, and your chamber would have gone into cascade failure." As Mac finished his work, the warning lights stopped flashing, and the chamber's hum returned to its normal, healthy tone. The watching crowd stood in stunned silence. Thane stepped forward, studying the human with new eyes. "You diagnosed and fixed in minutes a problem that stumped our best engineers for days." Mac shrugged again, wiping his hands on his coveralls. "Different perspective, I guess. Sometimes when you're too close to a problem, you can't see the simple solution." The Alpha Prime was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had witnessed. Intelligence, he realized, wasn't just about having access to the most advanced knowledge or the most sophisticated tools. Sometimes it was about being able to see patterns that others missed, to think creatively when conventional approaches failed. "You said this was a test," Thane said finally. "What exactly were you testing?" Mac looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Oh, that. Well, I guess I was testing whether anyone here was actually smart enough to be worth your time. I mean, you're supposed to be this legendary leader, right? The alpha of the pack. If you're going to choose someone to stand beside you, shouldn't they be able to solve problems that matter?" The implications of his words sent a ripple of shock through the assembled suitors. The human hadn't just solved a technical problem. He had essentially auditioned each of them and found them wanting. But more than that, he had issued a direct challenge to Thane himself. In culture, challenging the Alpha was a serious matter. It could be seen as an insult worthy of combat or as a display of courage worthy of respect. Thane found himself genuinely uncertain which interpretation was correct. And that uncertainty was perhaps the most intriguing thing of all. "You challenge me." Mac looked confused again. "Challenge you? No, I don't think so. I'm just a mechanic, but I guess I am curious about something." "Which is?" "Everyone here is trying to prove they're worthy of you. They're all bringing gifts and showing off their abilities, trying to impress the big scary Alpha. But what have you done to prove you're worthy of them?" The question landed like a physical blow. In thousands of years of tradition, no one had ever questioned whether the Alpha Prime needed to prove himself worthy of others. The Alpha was the Alpha precisely because he had already proven his worth through strength, cunning, and leadership. But as Thane looked around at the assembled suitors, each of whom had indeed demonstrated remarkable abilities, Mac's question began to make a strange kind of sense. These were representatives of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. What exactly did he offer them in return for their gifts? The silence stretched on, filled with tension and possibility. Thane realized that for the first time in years, someone had genuinely surprised him. More than that, someone had made him question assumptions he hadn't even realized he was making. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new note of respect. "That is an interesting perspective." Max smiled, and for the first time since entering the assembly hall, he looked completely at ease. Just trying to understand the situation, you know. Where I come from, relationships are partnerships. Both people bring something to the table. The watching crowd began to murmur among themselves, processing this radical concept. The idea that the Alpha Prime might need to prove himself to potential mates was almost incomprehensible to most of them. But Thane found himself nodding slowly. You speak of balance, of mutual respect. Something like that, Mac agreed. I mean, you're clearly a capable leader. You've built an impressive civilization, won important battles, kept the peace in dangerous territory. But can you fix a quantum resonance chamber when it breaks down at the worst possible moment? The challenge was clear now, and it was unlike anything Thane had ever faced. This wasn't a test of strength or strategic thinking. This was a test of practical competence, of the ability to solve problems with his own hands rather than simply commanding others to solve them for him. And Thane realized, to his own surprise, that he wasn't entirely certain he could meet that challenge. As the crowd began to disperse, chattering excitedly about what they had witnessed, Thane remained in the engineering section, staring at the now-functioning quantum resonance chamber. For the first time in his adult life, he felt something he had almost forgotten, the desire to learn something new. Was packing up his toolbox, apparently ready to return to whatever maintenance task he had been working on before this unexpected encounter. But Thane wasn't ready for their conversation to end. He called out, and the human turned back with a questioning look. Tomorrow, I would like to observe your work, to learn how you approach problems. Mac's eyebrows rose in surprise. Really? It's not exactly exciting stuff, mostly just routine maintenance and the occasional troubleshooting session. Nevertheless, Thane said, I believe I have something to learn from you. As the Alpha Prime of the Empire walked away, his mind was already working on a new kind of problem. For the first time in years, the choosing had produced a genuinely unexpected result. He had come seeking someone worthy of standing beside him as an equal. He had not expected to find someone who would challenge him to become worthy of that honor himself. The thought should have been disturbing. Instead, Thane found it exhilarating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps the beginning of something unprecedented in history. For the first time since the trials began, Commander Thane found himself genuinely looking forward to what came next. The next morning found Commander Thane in an unprecedented situation. For the first time in over a decade, he had risen early not to review tactical reports or attend strategic briefings, but to meet a human mechanic in the engineering section of his own flagship. He arrived to find already at work, lying on his back beneath a massive piece of machinery that Thane couldn't immediately identify. The human's legs were visible, along with the occasional shower of sparks and the sound of metal being shaped by expert hands. Good morning, Thane called out, feeling oddly formal. Morning, Mac's voice echoed from beneath the machine. Be with you in just a second. This coupling is being particularly stubborn today. A few more moments of work, accompanied by what sounded like human cursing, and Max slid out from under the machinery. His coveralls were somehow even dirtier than they had been the previous day, and he had acquired a new cut on his forehead that he seemed completely unaware of. Sorry about that, Max said, wiping his hands on a rag that looked like it had never been clean. The secondary plasma conduits needed some attention before they decided to fail at an inconvenient moment. Thane looked at the massive machine, which he now recognized as part of the ship's primary power distribution system. You can predict when components will fail. Max shrugged, a gesture that Thane was beginning to recognize as characteristic. Not exactly predict, but you can usually see the warning signs if you know what to look for. This particular coupling has been running about 3% hotter than normal for the past week. Given the stress patterns and material fatigue, I'd estimated it may be another 48 hours before catastrophic failure. The Alpha Prime studied the human with growing fascination. In culture, warriors were trained to read the battlefield, to anticipate enemy movements and identify weaknesses in defensive positions. Mac was doing something similar, but with machines instead of opponents. Show me, Thane said. What followed was perhaps the strangest day of Thane's adult life. Instead of commanding fleets or negotiating treaties, he found himself crawling through maintenance tunnels, learning to identify the subtle signs that indicated mechanical problems before they became critical failures. Mac proved to be a surprisingly effective teacher. He didn't lecture or overwhelm Thane with technical specifications. Instead, he showed him how to listen to the sounds machines made, how to feel for vibrations that indicated wear or misalignment, how to spot the early visual signs of component degradation. "See this scoring on the metal here?" Mac pointed to what looked like insignificant scratches on a pipe coupling. "That tells you the seal is starting to fail. Give it another few days, and you'd have coolant leaking into the plasma conduits. That's the kind of thing that can turn a routine patrol into a very bad day." Thane found himself genuinely engaged in a way he hadn't been for years. The work was physical, practical, and immediate in its consequences. There was no political maneuvering, no complex strategies to consider, just problems that needed to be solved with skill and creativity. As the day progressed, other crew members began to notice their Alpha Prime crawling around the engineering section with a human mechanic. Word spread quickly throughout the ship, and soon there was a steady stream of curious onlookers trying to catch a glimpse of this unprecedented scene. "Is it true that the Alpha Prime is learning to repair engines?" one junior officer whispered to another. "I heard he spent 3 hours learning how to realign quantum flux capacitors," came the whispered reply. The attention made Thane somewhat uncomfortable, but Max seemed completely oblivious to it. He continued his work with the same focused intensity, treating the most powerful being in the Empire exactly the same as he would treat any other student. "Your turn," Mac announced around midday, gesturing toward a diagnostic scanner. "The gravitational compensators in Section 7 have been acting up. See if you can figure out what's causing the problem." The challenge was both terrifying and exhilarating. Thane had commanded others to solve technical problems thousands of times, but he had never attempted to solve one himself. He took the scanner and tried to remember everything Mac had taught him about reading diagnostic data. The first few minutes were frustrating. The scanner produced streams of data that seemed meaningful but refused to resolve into clear patterns. Gradually, however, Thane began to see connections. The gravitational fluctuations weren't random. They followed a specific pattern that repeated every few minutes. "There," he said finally, pointing to a section of the display. "The primary stabilizer is functioning correctly, but something is causing periodic interference with its signal." Mac looked at the scanner display and nodded approvingly. "Good eye. What do you think is causing the interference?" Thane studied the data more carefully, trying to apply the pattern recognition skills that had served him well in military situations. "The timing suggests it's not a random failure. It's too regular. Something else is operating on the same cycle." "Such as?" "The backup life support sensors," Thane realized suddenly. "They scan this section every 4 minutes, and their scanning frequency is close enough to the stabilizer's operating frequency to cause harmonic interference." Mac's grin was genuinely approving. "Not bad at all. You're thinking like an engineer now." The compliment warmed Thane in a way that the praise of generals and admirals never had. This was earned recognition for something he had accomplished with his own hands and mind, not simply because of his position or inherited authority. As they worked to resolve the interference problem, Thane found himself asking questions he had never thought to ask before. "How did you learn to do this?" he inquired as Mac guided him through the process of recalibrating the sensor array. "Started when I was a kid," Mac replied, not looking up from his work. "My dad was a mechanic, worked on atmospheric processors on Mars. I used to help him during school breaks. There's something satisfying about taking something that's broken and making it work again." "But surely you could have pursued other careers. Humans value education, do they not?" Mac paused in his work and gave Thane a thoughtful look. "Sure, I could have been lots of things. Went to engineering school for a while, actually. But I discovered something interesting about myself." "Which was?" "I'm good at fixing things that other people can't fix. Not because I'm smarter than them necessarily, but because I approach problems differently. Academic engineers learn theory first, then try to apply it to real-world situations. I learned by working on real problems first, so I tend to see practical solutions that might not be obvious from a theoretical perspective." Thane considered this as they completed the calibration. In society, leaders were expected to be the strongest, the most intelligent, the most capable in all areas. The idea that different types of intelligence might be equally valuable was foreign to his experience. You're suggesting that practical knowledge and theoretical knowledge are different things. Not just different, Max said, complementary. The best solutions usually come from combining both approaches. Yesterday's quantum resonance chamber problem is a perfect example. Your engineers understood the theory perfectly, but they were so focused on the complex possibilities that they missed the simple explanation. As the afternoon wore on, Thane began to understand that Mac was teaching him more than just mechanical repair techniques. He was learning a different way of thinking about problems, about leadership, and about the value of different types of expertise. The lesson was reinforced when they encountered a problem that Mac couldn't solve immediately. One of the ship's secondary computer cores was producing error messages that didn't match any known diagnostic patterns. Instead of pretending to understand the issue, Mac immediately sought help from the ship's computer specialists. "This is outside my area of expertise," he explained to Thane as they waited for the specialists to arrive. "I know enough about computer systems to interface with them for mechanical repairs, but when it comes to software problems, I defer to people who know what they're talking about." The contrast with Thane's usual experience was striking. In his position, subordinates rarely admitted when something was beyond their capabilities. They were more likely to attempt solutions they weren't qualified to implement rather than appear ignorant in front of their alpha prime. When the computer specialists arrived, Thane observed something else unusual. Mac didn't simply hand the problem over to them and walk away. Instead, he worked alongside them, contributing his perspective while learning from their expertise. The collaborative approach produced results faster than either group could have achieved working alone. "The error pattern suggests a hardware issue," one of the specialists explained, "but we can't identify which component is failing." "Let me take a look," Mac said, pulling out his ancient scanner. "Sometimes mechanical problems can produce symptoms that look like software issues." 20 minutes later, they had identified a failing quantum processor that was producing intermittent errors too subtle for the computer diagnostics to detect, but obvious to Mac's pattern recognition skills. As they walked back to the main engineering section, Thane found himself reflecting on the day's experiences. For the first time in years, he had spent an entire day learning rather than commanding. More importantly, he had enjoyed it. He said as they reached Mac's workstation, "I want to ask you something." "Shoot." "Yesterday, you questioned whether I was worthy of the beings who came to compete for my attention. After spending today with you, I'm beginning to understand what you meant. But I'm curious about something else." Mac looked up from the tool he was cleaning. "What's that?" "What would make someone worthy of your respect?" The question seemed to surprise Mac. He was quiet for a long moment, apparently giving it serious thought. "Honesty, I guess," he said finally. "And the willingness to admit when you don't know something. Most of the really impressive people I've met aren't the ones who know everything. They're the ones who know what they don't know and aren't afraid to learn from others." Thane nodded slowly. "And if someone in a position of authority demonstrated those qualities?" Mac's smile was knowing. "Then I'd say they were probably worth following." The implications hung in the air between them. For the first time since the trials began, Thane felt as though he truly understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about choosing a mate or political alliance. It was about what kind of leader he wanted to be and what kind of civilization he wanted it to become. That evening, Thane returned to his quarters with his hands dirty and his mind full of new ideas. He had learned to diagnose mechanical problems, but more importantly, he had learned something about himself. The respect in Mac's eyes when he had successfully solved that gravitational compensator problem was worth more than the automatic deference he received from his subordinates. For the first time in years, he had earned something rather than simply commanding it. The next morning brought an unexpected development. When Thane arrived at the engineering section for his second day of education, he found Mac surrounded by several other crew members, all asking questions about the previous day's activities. Is it true that the Alpha Prime learned to repair quantum stabilizers? Did he really crawl through the maintenance tunnels? What was he like? Was he angry when he couldn't figure something out right away? Mac was handling the attention with his characteristic good humor, but Thane could see that the situation was making him slightly uncomfortable. More concerning was the reaction of some of the senior officers, who seemed scandalized by their commander's unconventional activities. Chief Engineer Vex approached Thane with obvious distress. Alpha Prime, surely there's no need for you to concern yourself with such mundane matters. These are tasks for subordinates. Thane studied his chief engineer's expression and realized that Vex was genuinely worried. In culture, leaders who involved themselves too closely with operational details were often seen as who didn't trust their subordinates' competence. "You believe my interest in engineering matters reflects poorly on your abilities?" Thane asked. "Not exactly, sir, but, well, it's unprecedented. Alphas lead, they don't perform maintenance." The comment crystallized something that had been bothering Thane since the previous day. The rigid hierarchy that had served them so well in military situations might actually be limiting their ability to solve certain types of problems. "Chief Engineer," Thane said carefully, "in your opinion, would our engineering efficiency improve if senior officers had a better understanding of practical maintenance procedures?" Vex looked confused by the question. Perhaps Alpha Prime, but surely that's not a proper use of command time." "What if I told you that yesterday I identified a potential failure in the gravitational compensation system that your regular diagnostics had missed?" The chief engineer's expression shifted to surprise, then concern. "You found a problem we missed?" "With guidance, yes. The question is, how many other problems might we be missing because we rely too heavily on automated systems and standard procedures?" Thane could see the implications sinking in. The military machine was incredibly efficient, but efficiency could sometimes come at the cost of adaptability. When faced with unusual problems, their rigid procedures might actually hinder creative solutions. "I want you to implement a new training program," Thane continued. "All senior officers will spend at least 1 day per month working directly with maintenance crews, learning to identify and solve practical problems." "Alpha Prime," Vex protested, "the other ship commanders will think." "The other ship commanders will think I'm developing more capable officers," Thane interrupted. "When word spreads that my crew can solve problems that stump other ships' engineering teams, they'll want to know our secrets." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. "Alpha Prime to the command center immediately. We have a situation." As Thane hurried to the bridge, he reflected on how much his perspective had changed in just 2 days. A week ago, he would have responded to this emergency by issuing orders and trusting his subordinates to execute them. Now, he found himself wondering what kind of practical problem they were facing and whether his new skills might be relevant to solving it. The bridge was buzzing with activity when he arrived. His first officer, commander, met him with a grim expression. "Alpha Prime, we've received a distress signal from the mining station on 442B. They're reporting critical system failures and requesting immediate assistance." Thane studied the tactical display. 442B was a remote mining operation that extracted rare elements essential for faster-than-light drive construction. It was strategically important but lightly defended. "What kind of system failures?" "Unknown, sir. Their communications are intermittent, but they mentioned something about cascading power failures and life support problems." Thane's new perspective immediately suggested questions he wouldn't have thought to ask a week ago. "Have we that this is actually a technical problem and not some kind of attack?" Commander looked surprised. "The distress signal appears genuine, Alpha Prime. There's no indication of hostile activity in the system." "No indication that we can detect from here," Thane corrected. "But if someone wanted to draw a powerful warship away from its patrol route, a fake technical emergency would be an effective method." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Their Alpha Prime was displaying an unusual interest in operational details. "What are your orders, sir?" asked. Thane considered the situation. Standard procedure would be to respond with maximum force, bringing the full power of the Prime to bear on whatever problem they found. But his recent experiences had taught him the value of understanding a situation before committing resources to a solution. "Set course for 442B, but maintain alert status," he ordered. "And send a message to tell him to report to the bridge immediately." Sir looked confused. "If we're dealing with technical problems, I want someone present who specializes in solving technical problems." When Mac arrived on the bridge 15 minutes later, he looked distinctly out of place among the military officers in their formal uniforms. His coveralls were clean, Thane noted with amusement, but they still carried the permanent stains that marked him as someone who worked with his hands for a living. "You wanted to see me?" Mac asked, looking around the bridge with obvious curiosity. "We're responding to a distress call from a mining station," Thane explained. "They're reporting cascading system failures. I want your perspective on the situation." Mac raised his eyebrows but moved to the communications station without argument. "Can I hear the original distress message?" As the recorded message played, Thane watched Mac's expression carefully. The human listened intently, occasionally asking the communications officer to replay specific sections. "Interesting," Mac said when the message finished. "Your assessment?" "Well, the technical problems they're describing are certainly possible, but the sequence doesn't make sense. Cascade failures usually follow predictable patterns based on system. What they're describing sounds more like someone is manually shutting down systems in a specific order." Commander leaned forward. "Are you suggesting this is sabotage rather than technical failure?" "I'm suggesting that someone who wanted to make sabotage look like technical failure would probably create exactly this pattern of problems," Mac replied. "Random system failures are messy and unpredictable. This is too neat." Thane felt a surge of satisfaction. His instinct to question the situation had been correct, and Mac's expertise was providing insights that his military officers wouldn't have considered. "Tactical assessment," he ordered. "Assume this is a trap. What would be the most likely attack scenario?" The bridge crew sprang into action, their training taking over as they analyzed the situation from a military perspective. Within minutes, they had identified 3 possible ambush scenarios, all of which involved using the mining station as bait to draw the Prime into a disadvantageous tactical position. "Recommendations?" Thane asked. "Standard doctrine would be to approach with shields raised and weapons ready," reported. "However, if this is genuinely a technical emergency, an aggressive approach might prevent us from providing effective assistance." Thane nodded, then turned to Mac. "From a practical perspective, what would be the best way to determine the true nature of the situation?" Mac thought for a moment. If their systems are genuinely failing, there should be specific electromagnetic signatures that we could detect from a safe distance. Cascade power failures produce very distinctive patterns that are almost impossible to fake convincingly. "Can our sensors detect those patterns?" "Probably, but you'd need someone who knew what to look for to interpret the data." Thane made his decision. "Commander, take us to sensor range but no closer. Run full passive scans and have analyzed the results. If he confirms genuine technical problems, we'll proceed with standard assistance protocols. If not, we'll treat this as a potential ambush." The approach to 442B took 2 hours, during which Thane found himself spending more time at the sensor stations than at his command chair. Watching Mac work with the sensor technicians was educational in itself. The human didn't simply analyze the data. He taught the technicians what to look for, expanding their diagnostic capabilities in real time. "There," Mac announced finally, pointing to a section of the sensor display. "That's what genuine cascade failure looks like. See how the power fluctuations are irregular but follow the physical layout of the station's electrical grid. If someone was faking this, they'd have to have incredibly detailed knowledge of the station's internal systems." "So the emergency is real?" "The emergency is real," Mac confirmed. "And if I'm reading these patterns correctly, they've got maybe 6 hours before their primary life support systems shut down completely." Thane was about to order an immediate rescue operation when Mac held up a hand. "But there's something else," the human continued. "Look at this secondary signal pattern. There's definitely a ship hiding behind the station's main asteroid. The power signature is masked, but you can see the gravitational distortion if you know where to look." The bridge fell silent as the implications became clear. The technical emergency was genuine, but there was also a hidden ship waiting in ambush. Someone had taken advantage of real system failures to set up a trap, knowing that any rescue ship would be focused on helping the miners rather than watching for threats. "That," Thane said with genuine admiration, "is remarkably sophisticated tactical thinking." Mac shrugged. "Just pattern recognition. The question is, what do we do about it?" For the first time in his career as Alpha Prime, Thane found himself facing a situation that required both military and technical expertise working in perfect coordination. Standard military doctrine would dictate destroying the hidden threat before rendering assistance, but that might take too long to save the miners. Standard rescue protocols would focus on helping the station, but leave them vulnerable to attack. He needed a third option, something that combined both approaches in a way that neither his military training nor established protocols had prepared him for. He said finally, "You've spent the last 2 days teaching me to think like an engineer. Now I need you to help me think like both an engineer and a military commander simultaneously." Mac's smile was understanding. "Tell me what resources we have available, and let's see what kind of solution we can improvise." The solution they developed over the next hour was unlike anything in military doctrine. Instead of choosing between rescue and combat, they would do both simultaneously by turning the mining station's technical problems into a tactical advantage. Mac had identified that the station's power failures were following a predictable pattern based on the physical layout of their electrical systems. More importantly, he realized that the pattern could be deliberately accelerated by overloading specific junction points, creating a cascade effect that would appear natural but could be precisely timed. "If we can trigger a complete power shutdown at exactly the right moment," Mac explained to the assembled bridge crew, "the station will go completely dark for about 3 minutes before their emergency generators kick in. During that blackout, the hidden ship won't be able to use the station's sensor array to track our movements." Commander studied the tactical implications. 3 minutes would be enough time to reach weapons range and establish a firing solution, but barely enough to complete a rescue operation. "That's where the engineering perspective becomes crucial," Thane said, beginning to see how the two approaches could work together. "Could you beam directly to the station's power control center and manually restore power faster than the automatic systems?" "Probably," Max said thoughtfully. "But I'd need detailed schematics of their electrical grid, and someone would have to get me to the right location without being detected by whoever's on that hidden ship." "I can provide stealth transport," offered. "A single-person infiltration pod could reach the station undetected during the power blackout." Thane felt the familiar excitement of a plan coming together, but this time it was different. Instead of simply issuing orders based on established doctrine, he was participating in the creative process of developing a new solution. "There's one more element we need to consider," he said. "Whoever set up this trap is clearly intelligent and well-informed. They'll have contingency plans for standard military responses. We need to be prepared for them to adapt when we don't behave as expected." Mac nodded approvingly. "Always assume your opponent is at least as smart as you are. What would you do if you were in their position?" The question sparked an intense tactical discussion that drew on both military and engineering perspectives. By the time they were ready to implement the plan, every member of the bridge crew understood not just what they were supposed to do, but why each element was necessary for the overall strategy to succeed. The operation began with the Prime broadcasting a standard rescue protocol message, announcing their intention to dock with the mining station and provide assistance. To any observer, they appeared to be following exactly the procedure that whoever had set the trap would be expecting. Meanwhile, Mac was sealed into a stealth infiltration pod, equipped with portable power tools and detailed schematics of the station's electrical systems. The pod was designed to be virtually undetectable, but it could only carry one person and had minimal life support. "Remember," Thane said over the communication link as the pod prepared to launch, "you'll have exactly 3 minutes of total darkness, then you need to restore power before their emergency generators activate. If you take longer than that, we'll lose our tactical advantage." "No pressure," Mac replied cheerfully. "Just another day at the office." The casual confidence in his voice reminded Thane of something important. For all the complexity of their plan, the core element was simply Mac doing what he did best, fixing broken machines under difficult circumstances. The pod launched during a routine sensor sweep, its trajectory masked by the natural movement of asteroids in the local field. As it approached the mining station, the Prime began its own approach, moving slowly and broadcasting continuous updates about their rescue preparations. "Hidden ship is still maintaining position," reported the sensor officer. "No change in their status." Power cascade initiation in 30 seconds, Mac's voice crackled over the communication system. Everyone ready. Thane took his position at the tactical station, abandoning the command chair for a hands-on role in the operation. Around him, the bridge crew prepared to execute the most unconventional rescue mission in military history. Initiating cascade failure, Mac announced. Mark. The mining station's lights went out in a precisely choreographed sequence, each section losing power as the cascade failure propagated through their electrical grid. Within 90 seconds, the entire facility was dark, floating silently against the backdrop of stars. The hidden ship reacted immediately, breaking cover and moving to a new position where they could maintain visual contact with the Prime. Clearly, they had been relying on the station's sensors to track their target and were now forced to improvise. Got them, Commander announced grimly. Hostile vessel is a modified attack cruiser, probably pirate configuration. They're moving to attack position. Max status report, Thane called out. I'm in, came the reply, accompanied by the sound of rapid work. Give me another minute and I'll have main power restored. The next minute was the longest of Thane's life. On the tactical display, he could see the hidden ship maneuvering for an optimal attack angle, clearly intending to disable the Prime and capture both ships. Standard doctrine would have required the vessel to either retreat or engage in direct combat, both of which would have meant abandoning the miners. 30 seconds to weapons range, reported. 20 seconds, Mac called out. Almost there. The hostile ship opened fire just as the mining station's lights began to flicker back to life. But instead of the gradual restoration that emergency generators would have provided, the power came back in a pattern that Mac had specifically designed to overload the station's external sensor array. For exactly 12 seconds, the resulting electromagnetic pulse created a sensor-dead zone around the mining station. During those 12 seconds, the Prime appeared to vanish from the hostile ship's instruments. When their sensors cleared, they found themselves staring down the weapons arrays of a fully armed battleship that had somehow moved to point-blank range without being detected. This is Commander Thane of the vessel Prime, Thane announced over an open channel. You will surrender immediately or be destroyed. The battle was over before it really began. Faced with overwhelming firepower at close range, the hostile ship had no choice but to comply. Within an hour, the pirates were in custody and the miners were safe. But for Thane, the real victory was something else entirely. For the first time in his career, he had participated in developing and executing a solution that no single person could have created alone. The success had required military expertise, engineering knowledge, and creative problem-solving working in perfect harmony. As the Prime prepared to escort the captured pirates back to space, Thane found himself reflecting on everything that had changed in the past 3 days. He had begun this period focused on choosing someone worthy of standing beside him as an equal. Instead, he had discovered what it meant to be worthy of standing beside others as a partner. The formal conclusion of the choosing ceremony took place that evening in the same assembly hall where it had all begun. The alien suitors had remained aboard during the rescue mission, and word of the unconventional operation had spread throughout the ship. When Thane entered the hall, he found the atmosphere completely different from 3 days earlier. Instead of formal presentations designed to impress, there was a sense of genuine curiosity and engagement. The suitors wanted to understand how the rescue had succeeded, and several of them had spent the day talking with crew members about the role that practical engineering had played in the mission. Mac was present as well, having returned from his successful infiltration of the mining station. He had finally found clean coveralls, though Thane suspected that by tomorrow they would be stained with evidence of whatever project he tackled next. The choosing is concluded, Thane announced to the assembled crowd, but not in the manner that tradition would suggest. A murmur of curiosity rippled through the hall. Over the past 3 days, I have learned something important about leadership, about partnership, and about the kind of civilization we want the Empire to become. I have learned that true strength comes not from individual dominance, but from the ability to combine different types of expertise in pursuit of common goals. He looked around the hall, making eye contact with each of the alien representatives who had traveled so far to participate in this ancient ritual. To those who came offering their knowledge and abilities in partnership with our civilization, I say this: Your gifts are valued, and your friendship is welcomed. But the choice I make today is not about choosing someone to be subordinate to my authority. It is about choosing someone who has shown me how to be a better leader and a better person. Thane turned to face Mac, who was looking somewhat uncomfortable with being the center of attention. You challenged me to prove that I was worthy of respect rather than simply commanding it. You taught me that intelligence takes many forms, that the best solutions often come from combining different perspectives, and that true partnership requires mutual respect and understanding. Mac looked genuinely surprised. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I am asking, Thane said formally, whether you would consider accepting a permanent position as my partner, my advisor, and my equal. Not as a subordinate, but as someone who will challenge me to be better and who will work alongside me to build something unprecedented in history. The silence in the hall was profound. What Thane was proposing went far beyond the traditional concept of the choosing. He was suggesting a fundamental change in how society thought about leadership and partnership. Mac was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of the offer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of careful consideration. Can I ask you something first? Of course. This partnership you're proposing, it goes both ways, right? You'll challenge me to be better too. Thane's smile was genuine and warm. I wouldn't have it any other way. Mac grinned and extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. Then yes, I accept, but I have one condition. Which is? Next time we're planning a complex operation that requires multiple types of expertise, we include representatives from all the relevant disciplines from the beginning. This idea that the commander has to figure everything out alone is inefficient and unnecessarily stressful. The suggestion sent a wave of surprised murmurs through the assembled crowd. The idea of collaborative leadership was radical by standards, but the success of the recent rescue mission provided compelling evidence for its effectiveness. Agreed, Thane said, clasping Mac's hand in the gesture that formally concluded the choosing. And I suspect we're going to need that collaborative approach sooner than we might expect. As if summoned by his words, Commander appeared at the entrance to the assembly hall, wearing the expression of someone bearing urgent news. Alpha Prime, he announced, we're receiving long-range communications from Command. There's been a development in the Outer Rim territories that requires immediate attention. Thane looked at Mac, who shrugged in his characteristic manner. Well, the human said, I guess we're about to find out how well this partnership works under real pressure. The communication from Command was indeed urgent. A survey expedition had discovered what appeared to be an abandoned alien city on a previously unexplored planet. The city was clearly built by a technologically advanced civilization, but there were no signs of current inhabitants. More intriguing, initial scans suggested that the city's power systems were still partially functional after what appeared to be thousands of years of abandonment. The survey team has requested immediate assistance, Commander reported as he briefed Thane and Mac in the command briefing room. Their preliminary investigation has raised more questions than answers, and they believe the situation requires someone with your authority to make critical decisions. Thane studied the long-range sensor data that had been transmitted with the request. The alien city was massive, covering an area larger than most military installations. The architecture was unlike anything in their databases, featuring flowing organic curves combined with geometric precision that seemed impossible to construct with conventional technology. What kind of decisions are we talking about? Mac asked, examining the technical specifications with obvious interest. Unknown, admitted. The survey team's reports have been confusing. They mention technological systems that don't conform to any known scientific principles and evidence of scientific achievements that should be impossible according to our current understanding of physics. Mac looked up from the data display with an expression of pure excitement. Are you telling me that someone built a city with technology we don't understand, then vanished, leaving all their equipment behind? That appears to be the case, confirmed. And you want us to go investigate this personally? The survey team has specifically requested the Alpha Prime's presence, said. They believe the situation may have significant implications for the future of the Empire. Thane considered the situation carefully. Under normal circumstances, he would have delegated such an investigation to subordinates while remaining in space to oversee more immediate concerns. But his recent experiences had taught him the value of direct involvement in complex situations. More importantly, this seemed like exactly the kind of challenge that would benefit from the collaborative approach he and Mac had been discussing. He said finally, "What's your assessment of the technical aspects of this situation?" Mac studied the sensor data more carefully, his expression growing increasingly intrigued. If these readings are accurate, we're looking at technology that's centuries ahead of anything in the known galaxy. The power distribution systems alone represent advances that could revolutionize our understanding of energy generation. And the risks? Unknown but potentially significant. Technology this advanced could be dangerous if we don't understand how it works. On the other hand, the opportunity to learn from it could be invaluable. Thane nodded slowly. Commander, set course for the survey expedition's location. Send a message to Command informing them that we are responding to the request for assistance. Yes, Alpha Prime. Estimated arrival time is 72 hours at maximum warp. As left to implement the new orders, Thane found himself alone with Mac in the briefing room. The human was still studying the sensor data, but Thane could see that his mind was already working on the challenges they might face. Excited about the prospect of studying alien technology? Thane asked. Mac looked up with a grin. Terrified, actually, but that's what makes it interesting. Besides, this seems like the perfect test case for our new collaborative approach. We're going to need military expertise to ensure the safety of the survey team, engineering knowledge to understand the technology, and creative problem-solving to deal with whatever surprises we encounter. And if the technology proves to be beyond our ability to understand or control safely, then we'll have to make some difficult decisions about how to proceed. But whatever we decide, we'll decide together, based on the best information and analysis we can develop. Thane felt a familiar surge of excitement as he contemplated the challenges ahead. For the first time in years, he was facing a situation that was genuinely unpredictable, where established doctrine and conventional wisdom might not provide adequate guidance. More importantly, he was facing it alongside someone whose perspective and expertise complemented his own, someone who had already proven capable of helping him see problems from new angles and develop innovative solutions. The next 3 days passed in intensive preparation for what they were beginning to think of as the abandoned city investigation. Mac worked with the engineering teams to develop portable diagnostic equipment capable of analyzing unknown technology safely. Thane collaborated with his military staff to design security protocols for exploring potentially dangerous alien installations. But the most significant development was the way their collaborative approach began to influence the entire crew. Officers who had never previously worked together found themselves sharing expertise and perspectives, developing solutions that none of them could have created independently. The transformation was most evident in the daily briefings, which evolved from formal presentations of predetermined information into dynamic discussions where junior officers felt comfortable contributing ideas and asking questions. The rigid hierarchy that had always characterized military operations began to give way to something more flexible and responsive. "You've changed the entire culture of this ship," Commander observed during one particularly productive planning session. "Not just me," Thane corrected. "Showed me that different types of expertise have equal value, but the crew made the choice to embrace that perspective. I just created the environment where it could happen." When the Prime finally arrived at the survey expedition's location, they found a scene that exceeded their wildest expectations. The abandoned alien city covered the entire southern continent of a planet that appeared to have been terraformed specifically to support it. The city itself was a masterpiece of architectural achievement, with buildings that seemed to flow organically from the landscape while reaching impossible heights. But it was the technology that truly understanding. Power conduits visible from orbit carried energy in patterns that violated known principles of physics. Transportation networks used gravity manipulation techniques that science considered theoretical impossibilities. And throughout the city, massive installations served purposes that the survey team couldn't even begin to guess. "Alpha Prime," the survey team leader reported as soon as transport was established. "We need to show you something immediately. What we've discovered in the Central District challenges everything we thought we knew about technological development. The Central District turned out to contain what appeared to be a vast computer system, but one based on principles entirely different from conventional technology. Instead of electronic circuits, it used crystalline matrices that stored and processed information through quantum resonance patterns. The system is still active, the survey team's chief scientist explained, but we can't figure out how to interface with it safely. Every time we attempt to establish a connection, our equipment is overwhelmed by data flows that exceed our processing capabilities. Mac examined the crystalline computer system with the focused intensity that Thane had learned to recognize. After nearly an hour of careful study, he announced his preliminary assessment. "This isn't just a computer," he said. "It's a learning system. It's been studying our attempts to communicate with it, adapting its output to try to find a format we can understand." "You're saying it's intelligent?" Thane asked. "I'm saying it's designed to facilitate communication with intelligences different from its creators. Give me some time to work with your computer specialists, and I think we can establish a safe interface protocol." The process took 18 hours of careful collaboration between Mac's practical engineering approach and the survey team's theoretical expertise. When they finally succeeded in establishing communication with the alien system, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The crystalline computer turned out to be a repository of knowledge left behind by a civilization that had achieved technological transcendence centuries earlier. They had abandoned physical existence for something beyond current understanding, but they had left their city as a gift for other intelligent species who might eventually discover it. The knowledge contained in the repository covered advances in physics, engineering, medicine, and dozens of other fields. But it was structured specifically to be accessible to civilizations at various levels of technological development, providing information that would be useful without overwhelming the recipient's ability to understand and safely implement it. "It's the greatest educational resource in galactic history," Mac announced after spending days studying the system's interface protocols. "But it's designed to be used collaboratively. No single individual or species can access all the information. It requires multiple perspectives working together." Thane understood the implications immediately. The alien civilization that had created this repository had learned the same lesson about collaborative problem-solving that he and Mac had discovered. They had encoded that principle into the very structure of their greatest achievement. Over the following weeks, as teams of specialists from throughout the Empire arrived to study the repository, the abandoned city became a center of unprecedented scientific collaboration. Species that had never worked together found themselves sharing discoveries and insights, developing new technologies and solutions through the kind of creative partnership that the repository seemed designed to encourage. The political implications were profound. The traditional emphasis on individual strength and hierarchical authority proved inadequate for making full use of the alien knowledge. Success required the kind of collaborative approach that Thane and Mac had pioneered, where different types of expertise were valued equally, and decisions were made through consensus rather than command authority. "You've started something that's going to change our entire civilization," Mac observed one evening as they watched teams of researchers from dozens of different species working together in the repository's central chamber. "We started something," Thane corrected, "and I suspect the changes are just beginning." 6 months later, the choosing ceremony on the Prime was remembered as the beginning of what historians would later call the Collaborative Revolution. The rigid hierarchies that had dominated galactic civilization began to give way to more flexible and inclusive approaches to leadership and decision-making. Thane and Mac's partnership became a model that was adopted throughout the Empire and beyond. The success of their collaborative approach in situations ranging from routine maintenance to complex scientific investigations demonstrated that the traditional emphasis on individual authority was often less effective than shared expertise and mutual respect. The alien repository continued to yield new discoveries and innovations, but perhaps its most important contribution was the principle it embodied, that the greatest achievements come from bringing different perspectives together in pursuit of common goals. As Thane stood in the assembly hall where his journey had begun, now converted into a collaborative planning center where representatives from dozens of species worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization to complete alone. He reflected on how completely his understanding of leadership had changed. The Alpha Prime who had started the choosing ceremony had been focused on finding someone worthy of serving beside him. The leader he had become was focused on being worthy of serving beside others. Mac approached, carrying a data pad filled with the latest reports from research teams scattered across the repository city. His coveralls were, as always, stained with evidence of hands-on work, but now they were joined by formal insignia marking his position as co-director of collaborative operations. The anti-gravity research team has made another breakthrough, Mac reported. They think they've figured out how to adapt the alien technology for use in our existing spacecraft designs. Any problems with the integration process? Nothing that can't be solved with the right combination of theoretical knowledge and practical engineering. The usual approach. Thane smiled. The usual approach had indeed become something unprecedented in galactic history. The systematic combination of different types of expertise in pursuit of solutions that no single perspective could have achieved. "What's next on our agenda?" he asked. Mac consulted his data pad. The Medical Research Consortium wants to discuss their proposal for collaborative healing centers. The Engineering Alliance has questions about resource allocation for the new transportation projects. And the Cultural Exchange Program is requesting guidance on establishing permanent academic partnerships. Each item on the list represented something that would have been impossible under the old system of hierarchical authority and competitive civilizations. The collaborative approach that had begun with a simple question about mutual worthiness had evolved into a new model for galactic civilization. "And personally," Thane asked, "any interesting mechanical problems requiring creative solutions?" Mac's grin was answer enough. There's always something interesting that needs fixing. That's what makes life worth living. As they walked together toward their next collaborative challenge, Thane reflected on the profound truth that the abandoned alien city had taught them. The greatest achievements in the universe weren't created by individuals asserting dominance over others, but by different kinds of intelligence working together in mutual respect and shared purpose. The alpha of the pack, he had learned, wasn't the strongest or the alpha was the one who could bring out the best in others and help them achieve things they never could have accomplished alone. And sometimes, the best way to prove your worthiness to lead was to learn how to follow.